Ian had always believed he knew every corner of his grandmother's house. He grew up spending entire summers there, running through the narrow hallways, playing hide and seek behind the heavy curtains, and sneaking mangoes from the backyard tree. But after her passing, the house felt different to him. It was quieter, heavier, as if every object held its breath, waiting for something to be discovered. On the third day of cleaning, sun rays filtered through the dusty windows, painting the room in a soft haze. Ian sat on the floor of her old library, surrounded by tall stacks of books. Many were worn, their edges frayed from years of being read. His grandmother had loved stories, ones about courage, ones about heartbreak, and especially ones about secrets. He picked up a faded poetry book, one he remembered her reading every night before bed. The spine cracked gently as he opened it. As he flipped through the pages, something thin and cream-colored slipped out and landed on his lap. An envelope. His breath caught. It wasn't just any envelope, it looked old, the paper slightly yellowed on the edges. A delicate floral pattern, barely visible, lined the border. But what struck him most were the words written across the front in careful, familiar handwriting. For my future grandchild. Ian's heartbeat echoed in his ears. He ran his thumb over the letters, recognizing the steady strokes of his grandmother's writing. It felt almost unreal, as though she were reaching out to him from another time, another world. He hesitated. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he should open it. What if it contained something painful? Something she never shared in life? He remembered her warm smile, her gentle hands, the way she always tucked his hair behind his ear and said, "Some things, Ian Beta, need time before they're ready to be understood." Maybe this was one of those things. Ian swallowed the knot in his throat and broke the seal. Inside was a neatly folded letter, written on stationery decorated with tiny blue forget-me-nots. The scent of old paper filled the room as he unfolded it carefully, afraid it might tear. Her handwriting flowed gracefully across the page, steady and emotional in a way that made his chest tighten. My dear grandchild. If you are reading this, it means time has carried you far enough to understand the weight of family stories. Ian blinked. His grandmother rarely spoke about the past. She was a woman of the present, always gardening, cooking, laughing, but never sharing her own history. He leaned closer. There is something I have kept hidden for most of my life. It is not because I did not trust anyone, but because the wound never truly healed. I had a sister. Her name was Zoya. Ian's eyes widened. A sister? He had never heard that name, not even once. In all the years, all the conversations, all the family gatherings, nothing. His grandmother continued. She and I were inseparable as children. We shared secrets under the mango tree, dreamed of a future where we would grow old together, and promised we would never let go of each other. But fate is not always kind. During a great flood, she disappeared. Ian's fingers tightened on the paper. He could almost hear the tremble in her words, even though they were written decades ago. I searched for her. For years, I searched. But the world is vast, and grief is a dark river. People told me to move on, to accept she was gone. But how does one accept the loss of a heartbeat that once echoed with your own? Ian inhaled shakily. He remembered how deeply she cared for every person she loved. If she lost someone that important, she must have carried that sorrow every day. I don't know if Zoya lived or died. I don't know if she found a new home, a new life, or if the river carried her away forever. But not a day passes that I do not wonder. A tear slipped down Ian's cheek. He had never seen this side of her. He had known her laughter, her strength, her warmth, but not her heartbreak. If you have found this letter, I ask only one thing of you. Do not let her story disappear the way she did. If you ever feel ready, look for her. Even if you find only traces, it will be enough. Let her know she was never forgotten. Ian pressed the letter to his chest, closing his eyes. The room felt heavier, fuller, like it was holding the echoes of a past no one had spoken of. He imagined two sisters laughing under a mango tree, making promises no child should ever have to break. A new understanding settled in him. His grandmother's silence hadn't been emptiness. It had been grief, wrapped in love, hidden in the pages of an old poetry book. As he sat among the dusty stacks, the truth felt both overwhelming and strangely clear. She was giving him a mission. A final wish. A story that needed a voice. And Ian knew, with a quiet certainty, that he would follow it no matter where it led. The letter didn't leave Ian's hands for the rest of the day. Even as he moved from room to room, sorting through old clothes, faded photographs, and rusted kitchen utensils, he kept returning to the neat blue handwriting. Every line echoed inside him like a whisper that refused to fade. A secret sister. A decades-old disappearance. A wish from beyond time. By evening, the sky outside had turned a soft orange. Dust floated in the golden light, swirling like memories brought back to life. The house smelled faintly of old wood and incense, his grandmother's favorite. He sat by the library window, the letter open on his lap, and stared out at the garden she had planted. Her roses drooped now, longing for a touch she would never give again. Ian gently traced the final sentence of the letter. Let her know she was never forgotten. The words tugged at him. They felt heavy, larger than the small room he sat in, larger even than the house itself. For the first time, he realized how deeply his grandmother had carried this mystery, hidden beneath her quiet smiles. But the more he thought about it, the more questions tightened around him like a net. Why had no one ever mentioned Zoya? How could a whole family erase someone so completely? Why hide it from the next generation? He stared at the old family portraits hanging on the wall. Some were sepia-toned, others cracked. He walked toward them slowly, his fingers brushing the frames. In one photo, his grandmother stood with her parents, smiling softly. Another showed her as a young woman holding her first baby, Ian's mother. But in none of them was there a second girl. No Zoya. Not even a trace. It was as if she had never existed. Ian frowned. It didn't make sense. His grandmother's words had been full of love, longing, and grief, feelings that couldn't be imagined or invented. He knew she wasn't someone who lied to protect herself. She lied only when she thought others deserved gentler truths. So why hide her sister? His eyes drifted to the hallway. One door remained closed, the old storeroom. A place no one touched anymore. A place even his grandmother rarely entered. Ian took a slow breath and walked toward it. The storeroom smelled like locked memories. The moment he pushed open the door, a wave of cold air brushed against him. Inside, boxes were stacked haphazardly, covered with gray blankets and spiderwebs. An old sewing machine stood in the corner, rusted and silent. On the top shelf were jars of forgotten spices. But what caught his attention was a wooden trunk in the corner. It was carved with delicate designs: sunbursts, flowers, crescent moons. He remembered it faintly. His grandmother used to keep her most precious things in it, before she stopped opening it altogether. Ian knelt in front of it. The metal latch was stiff, but it opened with a tired sigh. Inside, he found layers of folded cloth, shawls, scarves, and old cotton dresses. Beneath them were books, some filled with pressed flowers. He set them aside gently. Then something small and rectangular caught his eye. A photograph. He lifted it carefully. Two girls stood side by side, one he recognized instantly as his grandmother, much younger. Her smile was bright, her hair tied with a ribbon. Beside her stood another girl, slightly taller, with sharp eyes and a playful smirk. Zoya. Ian's breath caught. She was real. Not a memory, not a forgotten name, but a living person who once stood in that garden, laughed in these hallways, and shared a childhood with the woman he adored. He stared at the photo for a long time. The bond between the two girls was obvious. They were holding hands, leaning into each other, connected in a way only sisters could be. But something about the photo bothered him. It had been torn on one edge. Not torn accidentally, torn deliberately. Ian turned the picture over. The back was blank. No date. No message. Suddenly, the room felt colder. What had happened between these two sisters? What had the flood taken that the family didn't want to reopen? Why tear her out of the pictures of their lives? He placed the photo beside him and continued searching the trunk. Beneath the old clothes, he found a small diary wrapped in cloth. The cover was cracked, edges worn thin. Ian opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, "Zoya and me, our adventures." His heart pounded. Most of the diary contained simple details, their games, their dreams, the mango tree they climbed, the festivals they loved. But as he flipped toward the last few pages, the tone shifted. The water is rising. Abba says it will pass. Zoya says it looks angry. Another entry. They are evacuating people. Zoya ran toward the river. I don't know why. The last line chilled him. I lost sight of her. I screamed her name until my voice broke. I waited. She never came back. Ian's chest tightened. He closed the diary slowly, pressing his palm over its worn cover. The truth wasn't just a secret. It was a wound his grandmother had never allowed to heal. And now, the weight of that wound rested in his hands. As the house darkened around him, Ian knew this was only the beginning. There was more to uncover. More hidden in the silence of this house, in the memories of old neighbors, in the whispers of the past. Zoya's story hadn't ended in the flood. And he was determined to follow every thread, every clue. No matter how deep the secret went. Ian sat in the dim glow of the desk lamp, the diary open before him. Outside, the night had fallen, and the wind whispered through the old trees surrounding the house. He could still hear faint echoes of his grandmother's laughter, or maybe it was just the memory of it, haunting the quiet rooms. He reread the last entry, I lost sight of her. I screamed her name until my voice broke. I waited. She never came back. The weight of those words pressed on him, heavier than any burden he had ever known. He could almost feel the child his grandmother had been, the fear, the helplessness, the heartbreak. And somehow, he knew that this pain had never left her. She had carried it silently, wrapped it in daily smiles and warm meals, tucked it behind the curtains of every ordinary day. Ian swallowed hard. His fingers grazed the edges of the photograph again, Zoya's playful smirk staring up at him like a challenge. It was as if she were daring him to find her, to undo the decades of silence that had separated her from the family she was born into. He picked up the letter from his grandmother again. Her words, if you ever find this, promise me you'll try to bring her story home, pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. The mission she had entrusted to him was no longer abstract, it had become real, urgent, impossible to ignore. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened garden. The mango tree loomed in the shadows, its branches twisted like the hands of fate itself. He imagined the sisters running beneath it, laughing, making promises that the world had tried to steal away. I will find her, he whispered into the night. The words felt strange and powerful, like a promise not just to himself, but to his grandmother, to Zoya, and to the invisible threads that bound them all together. The next morning, Ian began his search in the most obvious place, the village near the river where the flood had occurred decades ago. It was smaller now, with fewer houses and more empty fields. Time had changed it, but the river still curved in the same way, cutting through the land like a silver scar. He spoke to the oldest villagers he could find, showing them the photograph and asking carefully crafted questions. Most shook their heads, their eyes clouded with memory or fear. But then an elderly man, hunched and wrapped in a faded shawl, stopped him. His eyes widened as they fell on the photograph. "I remember this girl," the man said slowly, his voice gravelly like the riverbed. "Zoya, she was clever, mischievous. The flood came, and many thought she drowned. But I saw her running toward the other side of the river. She didn't stay. She left. She thought no one wanted her." Ian's heart thudded. His grandmother had been wronged not by fate, but by circumstances, misunderstandings, and perhaps fear. Zoya had survived. "Do you know where she went?" Ian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head. "No one really knows. She disappeared into the world. But she always looked back. Sometimes, years later, she would be seen in towns far from here, never staying long, always moving. She never returned to the village." Ian felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Zoya had survived. Sadness that decades had passed without her family knowing. He looked down at the photograph again, then at the river shimmering in the sunlight. The water had carried her away, but the current of her life had continued, strong and unbroken. That evening, back in the house, Ian made a small plan. He would begin by following every lead the villagers had given him, tracing towns, asking questions, seeking whispers of Zoya's life. It wouldn't be easy. She might not want to be found. She might have built a life so separate that even the mention of her past could frighten her. But the promise to his grandmother weighed on him like a lighthouse in the dark. He could not abandon it. He could not leave her story unfinished. As he packed his bag for the journey, he touched the diary one last time. His grandmother's words had given him a map of emotion, a guide through the hidden pain of the past. And now, he carried that map with him into the unknown. He paused at the window once more. The mango tree's shadow stretched long across the garden. In the quiet, he felt something shift, a presence, almost imperceptible, like the faint brush of a hand on his shoulder. It was as if his grandmother's spirit was urging him forward. "I won't let her be forgotten," he whispered, voice steady now, heart resolute. Ian stepped out of the house, the letter tucked safely into his pocket, the photograph folded carefully in his wallet. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and fraught with questions he could not yet answer. But he had a mission, a promise, and a truth to uncover. And somewhere, out there in the wide world, Zoya waited, unaware that her story was about to be brought back home. Ian's journey began with nothing but a photograph, a letter, and fragments of stories whispered by old villagers. He traveled by bus, train, and on foot, following the threads of memory and rumor. Each town felt like a layer of time, streets worn by decades, faces lined with history, markets bustling with life that seemed untouched by the tragedy of one lost girl. He carried the photograph of Zoya close to his chest, showing it to anyone who might recognize her. Most shook their heads. Some offered vague recollections, a woman with sharp eyes, always in motion, never staying long. And then, in a small riverside town 3 days' travel from the flood village, a break in the trail came. An elderly man, hunched with age and wrapped in a faded shawl, paused mid-step as Ian approached him. His eyes widened when he saw the photograph. "I know her," he whispered, his voice trembling as though speaking aloud had exhausted years of silence. "Zoya, yes. She was here, many years ago. She stayed for a while, quietly, before leaving again. People said she never wanted to be tied down, but I always thought she was searching for something." Ian's heart pounded. "Do you know where she went?" The man shook his head slowly. "No. But I can tell you this, she's alive. I saw her once, at the edge of the town, walking toward the hills. She looked as if she carried the weight of the world, yet she moved like wind." Ian's hands clenched around the photograph. It was the first solid clue in weeks of uncertainty. He had found a whisper of her life, proof that Zoya had survived, proof that the story was not over. That night, Ian sat in a small inn, the diary and letter laid out on the table before him. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and boiled tea. He studied the photograph again, noticing details he had missed before, the way her eyes seemed to hold both defiance and sorrow, the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head as if daring the world to forget her. He thought of his grandmother, the quiet grief she had carried, the decades of longing, the love wrapped inside words that had never been spoken. And he understood, suddenly, that this search was not only about finding Zoya. It was about restoring a piece of his family that had been lost to time, about giving life to the stories that had been silenced. The next morning, he followed the trail the old man had described, heading toward the hills where Zoya had last been seen. The path was narrow, winding through dense trees and crumbling stone walls. Every step felt like a journey not just through space, but through memory and history. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, casting long shadows on the winding paths. Ian's thoughts wandered, imagining what Zoya's life might have been like, years of solitude, moments of joy stolen quietly, fears hidden beneath smiles. He wondered if she even remembered her family, or if the world had convinced her to forget. As evening fell, he arrived at a small village tucked in the folds of the hills. It was quiet, almost hidden, with houses built of stone and clay. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the scent of firewood and cooking spices. Something about it felt familiar, though he had never been here before. A woman was walking along the main street, her posture straight, her eyes sharp and alert. Something about her drew him in, an aura of strength, of resilience, and a quiet sadness that resonated with the story he carried. His breath caught. Could this be her? He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me," he said softly, showing her the photograph. "I'm looking for someone, Zoya. Have you seen her?" The woman stopped, studying the photograph. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a subtle tension in her shoulders. She didn't speak immediately. Finally, she said, her voice calm but distant, "Why are you looking for her?" Ian's heart raced. "She's my grandmother's sister. She's family. She's never been forgotten." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but a shadow of wariness lingered. "Family, that's complicated," she said. "I am Zoya." Ian froze. The photograph, the years of searching, the letter, the diary, all of it had led to this moment. She was real, alive, standing before him. The river of decades had carried her, but it had not broken her. Tears filled his eyes. "I've come to bring your story home," he said, his voice shaking. "To let you know that you were never forgotten." For a long moment, Zoya said nothing. She looked at him, at the photograph, at the letter, as if measuring the weight of the years and the promise that had finally reached her. Then, slowly, she nodded, a faint smile breaking through the layers of pain and caution. "You have a lot to tell me," she said quietly. Ian smiled, feeling a sense of triumph mixed with relief. The trail had led him here not just to a person, but to a story that had waited decades to be told. And somewhere, in the quiet of the hills and the fading light of day, the first threads of reunion began to weave themselves into a tapestry of hope, love, and forgiveness. The sun was setting over the hills, casting long golden shadows across the village. Ian walked beside Zoya, feeling the quiet hum of the world around them, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the soft calls of children playing near the riverbank. It was ordinary, yet every step he took felt extraordinary. After decades of absence, decades of longing, the story of Zoya's life was finally being touched again. Zoya walked with calm assurance, yet there was a hesitance in her movements, as though years of solitude had built invisible walls around her. Her eyes, sharp and clear, occasionally flicked toward him. In them, Ian saw glimpses of curiosity, guarded caution, and the faintest hint of hope. "You must have so many questions," Zoya said quietly, breaking the silence. Ian nodded. I do. But first, I want you to know something. My grandmother never stopped thinking about you. She never gave up hope. She, she wanted to bring your story home. Zoya paused, her gaze drifting to the hills. For a moment, Ian thought she might retreat, that the weight of decades would push her away. Instead, she took a deep breath and nodded slowly. I always thought, maybe I didn't belong anywhere. That the world had forgotten me, and so had my family. But it seems I was wrong. The words were soft, almost fragile, but they carried the weight of relief. Ian felt a lump form in his throat. All the letters, all the searching, all the years of whispered questions had led to this moment. They reached a small clearing near the river, the same river that had carried Zoya away all those years ago. The water sparkled in the dying light, reflecting the colors of the sunset. Ian pulled out the photograph from his wallet, the one from the trunk in his grandmother's house, and handed it to her. Zoya studied it carefully, her fingers tracing the edges. I remember this day, she murmured. Her voice was soft, yet it trembled with memory. We were so happy then. I didn't understand why the world could be so cruel. I didn't understand why I had to leave. You didn't leave because they didn't want you, Ian said gently. You left because you were scared. But the world hasn't forgotten you. And neither has your family. For the first time, Zoya's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at the photograph, then back at him. I never imagined someone would come looking for me after all these years. I thought the river took everything, my family, my home, my story. Ian smiled softly. It didn't. It just waited for the right person to find it. They sat by the river, the current flowing quietly between them. Zoya told him stories of the years she had spent away, places she had visited, people she had met, the life she had built in quiet isolation. Ian listened, asking questions, but mostly just letting her speak. He could feel the weight of her life, the loss, the courage, and the strength that had carried her through decades of uncertainty. When the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, Zoya finally spoke again. I never thought I'd see my family again. Not really. I imagined them remembering me in the small ways, quietly. But I never believed anyone would come looking. You're part of this family, Ian said. And your story matters. You've lived through so much, and now it can finally be part of the life we share together. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them over his. There was silence, filled only by the gentle ripple of the river. And in that silence, something shifted. A fragile bridge of trust, connection, and belonging began to form. A few days later, Zoya returned with Ian to the town where his grandmother had lived. It was a place full of memories, of laughter, of love that had waited patiently for her return. She walked slowly through the streets, every corner sparking a small recollection, a whispered memory. Neighbors and distant relatives gathered when they saw her. Some gasped, others cried. The years of absence melted into hugs and quiet smiles, tears and laughter mingling together. Zoya stood there, finally allowed to exist fully in the family she had been separated from. Ian watched her, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long, the path difficult, but every step had been worth it. The letter, the photograph, the diary, they had all led to this moment, a reunion decades in the making. Zoya finally turned to him, eyes glistening. Thank you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You brought me back. Not just to them, but to myself. Ian smiled, tears in his own eyes. No. You brought yourself back. I just helped you remember that you were never forgotten. That night, the family gathered under the stars in the garden of the old house. Lanterns glowed softly, casting warm light on faces that had waited too long for this moment. Stories were shared, laughter floated in the air, and tears were wiped away with gentle hands. Zoya's presence was like a missing note in a song finally played perfect, complete, and full of harmony. For Ian, for Zoya, and for the memory of his grandmother, the journey had ended, but the story, now whole, would live on forever. And somewhere, beneath the quiet rustle of the mango tree, it felt as if his grandmother were smiling, finally at peace.